I received notes from my future boyfriend. Here's what happened. Imagine waking up to find mysterious notes from your future self. Sounds like something out of a movie, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. These notes weren't just random, they predicted everything from my day to the guy I was about to meet. But here's the twist, they were from someone I had never met. Someone who claimed to be my future boyfriend. What's really going on? Is fate written in stone, or is someone pulling the strings behind the scenes? Stick around to find out how this wild, time-bending mystery unfolds. Trust me, you won't see this one coming. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment below on what you would do if you got a note from your future self. Silly story begins. Part 1, the first note. I hate Mondays. I mean, who doesn't, right? But this Monday? For some reason, I woke up feeling different, like something was about to happen. And it's not because I'm some kind of psychic or anything, but let's just say my gut has been right more often than it's been wrong. And today, my gut was practically vibrating with something weird. It all started last week, actually. I was going through my usual routine of caffeine-deprived cramming for my calculus exam, when I found the first note. It was wedged between the pages of my chemistry textbook, right next to my syllabus, which, let's be real, was more of a decoration at this point. At first, I thought it was just some stray homework assignment from a classmate who decided procrastination was a better hobby than studying. But nope. The note read, "You're going to need coffee for today's class. You'll thank me later." I blinked at it. What? Was this some sort of inside joke I was missing? The note was neat, like the handwriting of someone who spent way too much time on the penmanship section of Pinterest. I turned the page of my textbook, thinking I was just losing it, when my eyes caught a glimpse of something outside the library window. A coffee shop. Now, I wasn't usually the type to get my caffeine fix from anywhere but home, or the campus vending machine. But there it was, the coffee shop, just outside the campus gates, all warm and inviting. And sure enough, as I passed by, there it was, a caramel macchiato sitting by the counter, with my name written on the cup. Okay, now I really thought I was going crazy. "Coffee for Emily?" The barista called, her voice uncomfortably cheerful. That's me," I muttered, trying to sound casual, though inside, my brain was starting to spiral into a full-on existential crisis. Why the heck was I getting coffee? I didn't even like caramel macchiatos. But hey, free coffee, right? Still, as I grabbed the cup, a little voice in my head whispered, "This isn't a coincidence." And so, I drank the coffee, partly because I was too confused to reject it, and partly because I figured I'd need all the caffeine I could get to face whatever weirdness was unfolding in my life. Over the next few days, I received more notes. More unnerving, precise notes. They all seemed to predict the most random things with alarming accuracy. "You're going to crave chocolate during lunch today. There's a place on Main that does the best brownies. You'll find it." Well, sure enough, at lunch, I walked past a bakery I'd never noticed before. I went in, bought a brownie, and of course it was the best brownie I'd ever had in my life. Then, the next note came. "You'll bump into a guy from art history class at the bookstore later. Don't be rude. He's about to ask you something important." This one almost made me laugh. I didn't know any guy from art history well enough for them to ask me anything important, but I tucked the note into my pocket just in case. And you know what? At the bookstore, I literally bumped into Alec from art history. He was holding a book on medieval sculpture, looking entirely too serious about it, and he definitely didn't seem like the type to ask anyone anything important. But then, he said, "Hey, could you help me with a question?" "Wha, sure," I said, thinking, what could possibly be important about medieval sculpture? Turns out, he needed help finding a specific art book, and the rest of the conversation was about as exciting as watching paint dry. Still, the note had been right, and that was unsettling. And then, the best one of all, the note that really made me pause. "Look out for a guy in a red hoodie at your 4 p.m. lecture. He'll drop his notebook. You'll pick it up, you'll laugh, you'll become friends. Don't be an idiot and leave him hanging." Okay, now it was getting too specific. But sure enough, in the middle of my lecture on the French Revolution, a guy in a red hoodie stumbled into the room, tripped, and dropped his notebook right in front of me. I didn't even think about it. I just picked it up and handed it back to him with a grin. "Thanks," he said, looking at me with a half-smile that made my stomach flip a little. He had messy brown hair, and a slightly scruffy beard that made him look like a lumberjack who'd just gotten lost on the way to a hipster cafe. "No problem," I said, feeling a weird connection form between us that I couldn't quite explain. And then, he did what no one in my life had ever done. He actually sat next to me in the next class. In fact, For the rest of the semester, he was always there, sitting next to me. We didn't talk much at first, but eventually, we started chatting. His name was Luke. He was quiet, too quiet, honestly, and completely weird. He always wore that red hoodie. And no matter how many times I asked about his weekend plans, he'd either change the subject, or give some vague answer about catching up on some stuff. But one thing about Luke was clear: he never, ever spoke about himself. By now, I was hooked. And then, of course, the next note came. "I'm sorry. You're going to think I'm weird, but I'm not sorry enough to stop. I'll explain later, I promise. Just hang in there." I couldn't help it. I felt a nervous twinge in my stomach, like I was about to step into something much deeper than I was prepared for. I needed answers. Part 2: Confronting Luke. I don't know how long I stared at Luke after the last note, but when I finally managed to pull myself together, it was clear that I couldn't just keep pretending none of this was happening. So, I did what any normal, slightly confused, caffeine-addicted student would do. I confronted him. It was a Thursday afternoon, and we were both in the library, surrounded by towering stacks of textbooks we'd never actually open. Luke was sitting at one of the tables, scribbling something in his notebook, his usual intense frown in place. It was like he was trying to solve world hunger and math equations, but I had no idea what was going on in his head. So, I just walked over, cleared my throat, and said, "Hey, Luke, do you know anything about these weird notes I've been getting? Some guy seems to think he's my future boyfriend or something. It's really creepy, but also kind of sweet." I laughed awkwardly, but Luke didn't laugh. He didn't even look at me. His fingers were clenching the edges of his notebook so hard that I thought he might rip it in half. His face looked pale, almost like he'd seen a ghost. But it wasn't a ghost, was it? It was me? And I didn't know what was worse: the fact that my life was starting to feel like some bad rom-com, or that I was pretty sure the guy in front of me had answers I needed, and he wasn't giving them to me. Without looking up, Luke muttered, "Maybe you should sit down." I blinked. "What?" "Just sit," he repeated, his voice unnervingly quiet. Something about his tone made me obey, and I sat down in the chair across from him, suddenly feeling like a rabbit in a cage. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I couldn't tell if it was from nerves or anticipation. Luke reached into his bag, pulling out something that immediately caught my attention: a worn, crinkled envelope. It was heavy, way too heavy to be just a piece of paper, and it looked like it had been handled by someone with trembling hands. I eyed it suspiciously. "This is for me?" Luke nodded slowly, and there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt? Fear? I couldn't quite place it. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It felt like it belonged to a different life. Maybe my life, maybe his, but certainly not a normal life. With trembling fingers, I ripped it open. Inside was another note, and this one was different. This one wasn't from some anonymous future boyfriend. No, this one had handwriting that was far too neat to be Luke's, and it was old. Much older. It looked like it had been written years before I ever stepped into his life. I read it aloud without meaning to. "I know you're confused, but trust me, this will all make sense soon. I'm not from this time. I don't belong here, but I need to make sure we end up together. You'll have questions, and I don't blame you for that, but the only way I can be with you is if you trust me. So I'm following the script I found." The script I have to follow? I froze. My mind was screaming, what the actual hell? I felt like I had just stepped into the twilight zone, but Luke's hand on my wrist yanked me out of my spiraling panic. His fingers were cold against my skin, and his eyes were wide, frantic. "Emily," he said, his voice shaking now, "I'm the one who's been leaving the notes. But the thing is, I found them years ago, before we even met. They were written by me. In the future? In a future where we're more than just classmates. We're together." I blinked, not sure I'd heard him correctly. "Wait, what?" My head was spinning. I grabbed my head, trying to keep everything from crumbling into a mess of confusion. "How are you? What do you mean? You can't be serious. This is like time travel or some sci-fi nonsense." Luke took a deep breath and wiped his palms on his jeans like he was trying to ground himself. "I know it sounds insane, but I swear it's real. I don't understand it either, but every note, every word, every detail, it's all from me. It's me, but from the future, and I'm just following the instructions to get us to where we need to be." I blinked a few more times and rubbed my temples, because surely I was imagining this. There was no way this was actually happening. It was like my life had gone from boring student to something else entirely. But somehow, I didn't feel the need to laugh. Something inside me, maybe it was the way he was looking at me like his world was shattering too, made me believe him. It was insane. It was impossible. But I believed him. I could feel the weight of the moment press down on me. Like the world was holding its breath. I needed answers, but the way Luke was holding onto that notebook like it was his lifeline, that told me I wasn't going to get them easily. Okay, I said, trying to steady my breath. So, let me get this straight. You're not just some creepy stalker, right? You're from the future. Luke looked sheepish, like he'd been caught doing something much worse than sending creepy notes. I'm really sorry about the creepy stalker part. That wasn't supposed to be how it started. I shook my head, still trying to process everything. Wait, what? So, you're saying that you already know everything about me? About us? His face softened, and there was something so raw about it that my heart did a funny little flip. I know how this sounds. I swear I do. But the truth is, I found the notes when I was older. I found them, and they were from me, from the future, and when I read them, I couldn't just let it happen. I had to do everything in my power to make sure we ended up together. So I started following the script. Every note, every action, it's all been leading to this. I could feel my chest tighten, and my throat suddenly felt dry. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I rubbed my temples, and asked the question I didn't want the answer to. So, what happens now? How do we get to the part where we're together? My voice cracked on the last word. Luke's eyes flickered to the floor, and for a moment, I thought maybe he was going to tell me it was all a joke, that we were just part of some elaborate prank. But instead, he hesitated before answering. Well, there's one more note you haven't received yet, he said softly. It's the last one, and when you read it, you'll know everything. And just like that, my entire world seemed to tilt, flipping me upside down into a void of unanswered questions and possibilities I couldn't even begin to comprehend. One more note, one more twist, and then, maybe, I'd know everything. Part 3, the final note. A week passed in a blur of uncertainty. Each day felt like I was living in two parallel worlds. The present, where I was a normal, somewhat awkward college student, and the future, where I was in a relationship with Luke. I couldn't tell if I was waiting for the world to collapse or if I was just losing my grip on reality. But then, just when I thought my life had finally settled into an almost manageable chaos, the final note arrived. It was during the break between my philosophy and economics classes, and I was heading to my locker, hoping for a few minutes of peace before I had to dive into the mess of essays and research projects waiting for me. I had no idea I was about to stumble into another plot twist. As I opened my locker, I noticed a small folded piece of paper tucked into the corner, wedged between my notebook and my half-used bottle of hand sanitizer. I pulled it out, my heart beating faster than it had in weeks. The handwriting was familiar, it was Luke's, though something about it looked more urgent than usual. I read it aloud to myself. This is it. You're going to laugh at this. You're going to think I'm an idiot, but trust me, Emily, we'll end up together. I'll be with you. Always, just like I'm supposed to be. I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me. I was supposed to be with Luke. I had barely understood the notes up until now. And he was talking about being together as though it was already a done deal. But as I read the rest of the note, my stomach dropped. Beneath the words was a picture. A blurry one. But it was me, holding the exact same note in my hand, standing outside the library, the sun barely starting to dip behind the trees. I couldn't even explain the sensation that washed over me. But my heart skipped a beat. The photo was a snapshot of the future. Of a future where I had already fallen in love with Luke. Where we were already together. I stared at the picture for a long time, my mind refusing to make sense of it. It was real. It was real. I was holding a note I had just received, but I was also holding it in a future that hadn't happened yet. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with that information, and I definitely wasn't sure if I even wanted to follow some preordained script, but it was hard to ignore the feeling that something was happening here. Something I didn't understand. Something that was more than just chance. The question echoed in my mind over and over. Was I following the script too? Or was I finally truly writing my own story? Part 4, the twist. The next few days passed in a haze. I couldn't focus on my assignments. I couldn't focus on anything. All I could think about was the picture, and the reality that maybe Luke was telling the truth. Maybe we were destined to end up together. But what did that mean for me? Was this life really mine if it was all just being written for me? I started watching Luke more closely, the way his fingers always seemed to hover over his bag, like there was something inside he was hiding. The way he scribbled in his notebook during class, his eyes flickering over the page like he was trying to piece together a puzzle, or maybe a prophecy. I couldn't decide. And then, after one particularly torturous lecture on the Renaissance, seriously, does anyone care about 15th century Italy? Luke leaned over to me in that quiet, almost conspiratorial way of his and whispered, "So, you ready to make a decision?" My brain short-circuited for a moment. A decision about what? Luke didn't even look at me. He just kept his gaze trained on the professor, pretending like he wasn't dropping bombs of existential dread. "You're gonna make the choice," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "We're here, Emily. This is the part where you decide if you're going to follow the script, or if you're going to trust me enough to change it." My stomach turned. I felt like I had a deadline looming over me, and the weight of it was enough to make my hands shake. "What are you talking about, Luke? What do you mean, follow the script? I didn't even ask for this." Luke's expression softened just a little, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. "I know this all sounds insane, but you do have a choice. You can follow the notes, follow the plan, and let everything happen the way it's supposed to. Or," he paused, his voice almost tentative now, "or you can trust me enough to rewrite our future." I stared at him, my heart pounding, unsure whether I should laugh or break down into a puddle of sheer panic. "Luke," I whispered, my voice trembling, "what if I don't want the script? What if I don't want this whole future thing?" Luke's eyes softened again, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability. He reached over and placed his hand over mine, warm and steady. "Then we'll write our own story," he said, his voice low, but certain. "You don't have to follow the script, Emily. You just have to trust me enough to write the next chapter." For a long, surreal moment, I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My head was spinning, my heart racing. The idea of having a future where I wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game was terrifying. But then again, the idea of not having a choice at all was even more terrifying. I thought about the future, the one where I had already fallen in love with Luke, the one where we were together. But did I really want to let fate, or some invisible script, decide for me? For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was losing my grip on reality. I felt like I was gaining it. I looked up at Luke, and there was a small, hopeful smile on his face. "You really want to rewrite everything?" He nodded. "With you? If you'll let me." And for the first time I believed him. I smiled back, my voice steady now, though a little shaky with excitement. "Okay, let's write our own story, Luke. No scripts, just us." And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The end, or just the beginning. "All right, let's settle this once and for all. If you found a note from your future self, would you follow the script or change the course of your own story? Drop your answers in the comments, and let's see who's a fate follower and who's ready to rewrite the future."